Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old Fourth Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
And I promise you, just as soon as I completed yesterday's show, this news broke. Let's go to NBC News 23-ish hours ago.
Meanwhile, a big development in Donald Trump's criminal case down in Georgia. As we mentioned just earlier in the show, the state's appeals court has agreed to hear the former president's push to disqualify the head prosecutor. That, of course, is Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. No one better than to explain all of this to us than Blaine Alexander, live there in Georgia for us. Blaine, you have followed every twist, every turn in this case. What does this ultimately mean for the trial date? Because we know here the timing was always the crucial thing at play, especially in this election year. Could this be delayed until after the election now?
Yeah.
Well, Morgan, it certainly won't help when we talk about timing, right? You know, all along, Fani Willis had said that she wanted to bring this to trial by sometime this summer. Early August was what she was saying. All along, that had been looked at as an ambitious date. But then when you kind of look at how this year has played out, the fact that these allegations against her really sidelined the case for the better part of at least 3 months this year. And now the fact that this appeal is going to happen, that certainly doesn't make it likely that we're going to see this go to trial before the end of 2024. Now, I think it's important to point out that Judge Scott McAfee has said whatever happens in the appeals process, he's not going to stop his train. He's not going to stop doing the hearings and moving the case forward on his side. And so theoretically, there shouldn't be much of a pause. But again, as this plays out in the appeals court, there certainly is going to be at least some delay as attorneys focus their attention there. And so a lot of questions as to what this will mean for timing, Morgan.
Not to relitigate here, but again, an unforced error. By the way, there was also the ABC News interview with Nathan Wade, Fani Willis's embattled special prosecutor and apparently former boyfriend, who decided he wanted to speak out and spoke to ABC News and called the workplace romance that they had as American as apple pie. So is powerful white men using the judicial system to get out of kerfuffles that they worked themselves into. But I digress. Let's listen to this a little bit.
To an ABC News exclusive, our interview with Nathan Wade. He helped lead the prosecution in the election interference case against former President Trump and others in Georgia. But in March, a judge's order forced him to resign after it was revealed that he had a romantic relationship with Fani Willis, the Fulton County DA who hired him. Now he's speaking out for the first time about that relationship.
Workplace romances are as American as apple pie. It happens to everyone. But it happened to the two of us.
Do you regret it?
I regret that private matter became the focal point of this very important prosecution.
But that's just it. When you are heading a very special, very important prosecution, you also have to make sure that your own backyard is cleaned up, that the yard is trimmed, that the house is clean. You can't create additional issues by giving ammunition to those that you're trying to prosecute, especially when you know that this is such a hyper-partisan, politically charged situation.
This is a very important case.
Yes.
I hate that my personal life has begun to overshadow the true issues in the case.
But at some point, once that bond is there, and if democracy is on the line, as has been described,
it's more important.
Do you say, maybe we pause this until after the case is over?
Absolutely. I'll concede that could have been an approach, but there again, when you are in the middle of it, these feelings are developing, and you get to a point to where the feelings are so strong that you start to want to do things that really are none of the public's concern.
See, but I hate to side with the Trump people, but no, it's not that it's not the public's concern. It became the public's concern because you let it. And are we talking to teenagers here? I mean, I get it. The heart wants what the heart wants. When you're a teenager, when you're in your 20s, these two are not in their 20s. Let's just put it that way. Middle-aged, grown adults, professionals, ambitious professionals, a special prosecutor working for a district attorney who is prosecuting the former president of the United States who sought to overturn the 2020 election in the state that they're working in. Kind of an important thing. I mean, really, eye on the prize here. I get it. The heart wants what the heart wants. But we're not talking about teenagers who just aren't emotionally capable of turning off the spigot and focusing on work. Okay, so there really is no point in going over that again. I think we've kind of covered that ad nauseum, especially when it broke over the spring. Let's go to the piece that Tamara Hollerman posted in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where she points out, here's what the consideration from the state's second highest court could mean for the case. Headline, subheadline, I should say, significant delays coming. Well, duh. I mean, that's the game plan all along. The conflict of interest part to me never made any sense. There is no conflict of interest because they're working on the same side. How do you make that a conflict of interest? You don't. But this is just something to kind of throw a little wingnut in the gears here to kind of grind things to a halt. Even before this week, it was looking unlikely that Fulton prosecutors were going to get their wish of an August trial start date, Hollerman writes. Now, with the question of Willis' removal tied up in appeals court, legal observers are predicting that any major action on the underlying Trump election case will be postponed until well into 2025. Now, keep in mind here, election is November 2024, inauguration January 20th, 2025. The underlying Trump election case will be postponed until well into 2025, Hollerman writes. If Trump is sworn in office, this all goes away. Hollerman writes, that means that voters heading to the polls this fall almost certainly will not know if the expected GOP nominee for president will be found guilty or not by a jury for his efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. As to why analysts are so confident nothing will happen before the new year, Hollerman asks, the busy Court of Appeals isn't known for moving particularly fast. Once 3 judges are assigned to the case, they must schedule oral arguments and make a decision within 2 terms of court. If judges are assigned before July, that means a decision would need to be made by mid-March 2025. After that, whichever side loses is expected to appeal to the Supreme Court of Georgia. That's before jury selection for the underlying case could begin. By the way, did we point out that there is a Georgia Supreme Court seat on the ballot later this month? We just had John Barrow on just a couple of days ago. Listen to that at ronshowatl.com. Tamar Hollerman continues, possible nightmare scenarios for Willis. For the first 3 months of the year, the DA faced a barrage of negative headlines and court filings that delved into the most intimate details of her personal life. It all but culminated in a dramatic evidentiary hearing in February in which Willis and Nathan Wade, her ex-boyfriend, who at the time was the lead prosecutor on the election case, both took the witness stand to defend their actions, all under the glare of the national media. Hollerman continues, even with Wade off the case, and he is now, many of those matters will be relitigated before the appeals court. The panel won't be collecting new evidence, but it will determine whether Fulton Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee arrived at the correct legal conclusions when he gave Willis a path to stay on the case. It's possible the court overturns McAfee's ruling and issues what would be a nightmare decision for Willis and her office, mandating that she be removed from her biggest case, the biggest case of her career, and that her staff, with expertise generated over more than 3 years of work, will be disqualified. Trump and his co-defendants also want the charges against them dropped, which, if granted, would be a catastrophic result for prosecutors. Ponder that. Hollerman continues, the court's pace also means that the fight will continue to loom over Willis as she runs for re-election. Yeah, that is true. She faces a primary challenger in Christian Wise Smith on May 21st. Don't know how hard he's really been campaigning. And the winner of the Democratic contest will move on to face Republican Courtney Kramer in November. Ponder that, Fulton County voters. Willis is seen as the overwhelming favorite in both contests, but the revival of the disqualification fight certainly isn't what the DA wants to be talking about on the campaign trail. Or is it? Her GOP critics will make hay of the appeals court's consideration and continue to slam her for it in public. And by the way, that's not even, to me, the worst of it. Here's the worst of it. The worst of it is even some of the work that they were able to get done, some of the decisions that were already made in court could be undone. Hollerman continues, the Court of Appeals' decision to take up the disqualification issue could also open the door to revisit other pretrial issues. Judge McAfee previously has decided, according to Atlanta defense attorney and appellate lawyer Andrew Fleischman. In other words, Fleischman's saying here, now that the appeals court has agreed to hear the disqualification issues, defendants may be able to challenge other rulings they've lost in the election case since August, where McAfee was assigned. Among the items that could be considered, McAfee's recent refusal to drop some of the charges against Trump and others on First Amendment grounds. I'm no attorney or legal scholar, but I also wonder, what about some of the plea deals that were agreed upon? What happens to those? And as we heard in the NBC News piece? Yeah, the NBC News piece, Scott McAfee does get to keep continuing to move the train, so to speak. Hollerman writing, McAfee previously said he intends to keep moving forward on some of the case's other outstanding procedural issues as the appeals court proceeds. Among them are pretrial motions challenging the soundness of multiple counts in the indictment, including the racketeering and false statement charges. Defendants have also challenged the indictment based on the U.S. Constitution's supremacy clause, double jeopardy, and the idea that former federal officers should be immune from state-level prosecutions. By the way, that's kind of important because state prosecutions cannot be pardoned at the federal level. They have, according to Hollerman, asked for him to change the venue of the trial out of Fulton County and to split up the 15 remaining defendants. The judge recently asked the two sides to brief him about several counts in the indictment that have to do with materials presented to Georgia's federal court in late 2020. Some legal experts, Hollerman writes, have argued that those alleged criminal acts could fall under federal, not state jurisdictions. Last line in the article. However, it's possible that Trump or his co-defendants could seek a stay from the appeals court, which would bar McAfee from moving forward until the appeal is resolved. That would further delay matters. I'm angry as a Fulton County taxpayer and voter who, has to weigh in on a district attorney's race now and consider my options, because this is a huge self-induced, unforced error by the district attorney we in Fulton County elected. A lot of money has been spent on this, and obviously, as a voter, as most voters have said in polls, we like to have an outcome before we decide who the next president of the United States is going to be for the years 2025 through 2028. All of these delays, all of these issues that face voters, not only in Fulton County, but throughout the United States, in limbo because two adults in their early to mid-50s didn't consider the ramifications of bowing to, quote, the heart wants what the heart wants. All right, when we come back, we'll also shift our focus a little bit to the Stormy Daniels testimony and why that may also be something of an unforced error for prosecutors. When the Ron Show returns on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com, or wherever you podcast. RonShowATL.com, where you go to listen to past episodes, or you're just jumping into the middle while listening on the America One Radio app or at AmericaOneRadio.com, on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com. You can go to RonShowATL.com, hear the whole thing in its entirety. So we talked a good bit about the Fani Willis situation here, the election interference case here in the state of Georgia. Meanwhile, in New York, yesterday is the weekly off day for that case. Donald Trump, Stormy Daniels, et al. Are going to be back in a courtroom today. We're going to hear more from Stormy Daniels, and I'm not even sure that any of this was even necessary. Keep in mind, this is not about a case that involves him being prosecuted for having an affair with a porn star or even paying off the porn star. No, it's about the business cover-up where he funneled the money to pay to quiet the porn star while running for office through his fixer, Michael Cohen. That's at the heart of why he's being prosecuted here. What he did with Stormy Daniels in private, consensual, by the way, she's not argued that, really has almost no relevance. In fact, the relevance may only exist for him and his attorneys when they go to file an appeal, because they're going to say that her testimony poisoned the jury. And I get it. We don't need to make the case that the guy is a scumbag or that he forces himself on women. We have that on the hot mic, right? We've got that from Access Hollywood, that he likes to force himself on women because they let him. He likes to grab them, in the no-no spot and kiss all over. Right? We have all this already. Let's give you some takeaways from Reuters about this.
Former porn star Stormy Daniels took the witness stand on Tuesday at Donald Trump's criminal trial in Manhattan. Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, described in graphic detail her alleged 2006 sexual encounter with the former U.S. president. Trump has pleaded not guilty to charges he falsified business records to cover up a $130,000 hush money payment to her ahead of the 2016 election. Here are 3 takeaways from the first day of Daniels' testimony. Daniels made clear that she did not decline what she described as Trump's sexual advances at a celebrity golf tournament in Lake Tahoe. But she said she had, quote, blacked out before finding herself in a hotel room with no clothes on, though she said she had not consumed drugs or alcohol.
And again, that's something that speaks to his character, but that's not what he's on trial for here. If there was some sort of a roofie slipped in a drink or something like that, again, it's supposition at this point. There's no toxicology or anything like it. This doesn't get to the heart of the matter of him using his businesses to funnel money to his fixer to pay her off to keep her quiet.
Daniels testified that there was a, quote, imbalance of power, but that she was not, quote, threatened verbally or physically. Daniels described the alleged encounter in lurid detail, including Trump allegedly not wearing a condom during sex. Trump's lawyers asked Justice Juan Merchan to declare a mistrial, arguing such details served only to, quote, inflame the jury. Merchan denied the request, but urged prosecutors to limit Daniels' testimony.
And the thing is, I know they had to have had some sort of conversations before going on the witness stand as to what would be covered, what would be asked, and what would be said. And who didn't vet this better?
Merchan said, quote, there were some things that probably would have been better left unsaid.
Gee, you think?
Jessica Roth, a former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, said the details could help illustrate why Trump would have taken steps to silence Daniels.
She talked about the encounter in ways that did not allege that it was a sexual assault, but came very close to describing it in those terms. Things that, again, were not necessary for the story in terms of the allegations and the charges in this case. That said, there is an argument that some of the detail was necessary for the jury to evaluate why Trump would have been so concerned about the story coming out when it did.
The thing is, I've just, again, this is already clearly established. We know the guy is a womanizer, that he thrusts himself on women and forces himself. He has admitted as much on, again, the Access Hollywood hot mic. I'm just asking, how does this help with the case?
Trump's defense sought to highlight Daniels' animosity towards Trump under cross-examination. They showed jurors a 2022 tweet in which Daniels referred to Trump as a, quote, orange turd. And when asked if she hated Trump by one of his lawyers, Daniels replied yes without hesitation. When asked if she wanted Trump to go to jail, Daniels responded, quote, if he is found guilty, absolutely.
I mean, y'all, here we are. This is this is what kills me. Because of Eileen Cannon in Florida and the Department of Justice delays and now the Fani Willis delays. This is the one case that we could conceivably see a jury give us a verdict on prior to voters going to the polls to decide who's going to be the president of the United States, whether it's going to be the current president, Joseph Robinette Biden, or the man on trial in all of these theaters here. And we're left at the mercy of the Stormy Daniels payoff. And even here, where this seems to be something of an open and shut case, there were those who thought that this was actually the weakest of all of the cases months ago, and now it's shaping up to be the only case that we will see cross the finish line prior to Election Day, but was also shaping up to be quite a strong case. And now we are seeing prosecutors with Stormy Daniels on the witness stand and apparently not coached to keep things focused on the crimes being prosecuted, giving Trump and his attorneys an opportunity and fodder for going into an appeal. It's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine, a paralegal, about all this, just both of us exasperated at all these self-induced, self-inflicted errors, these unforced errors happening everywhere. Well, I say everywhere. The Cannon situation is a Trump-appointed judge helping Trump out. Go figure. But we watch this, and it's if we've not learned anything from this, it's that we seem to have picked up on the fact that our judicial system is not set up very well to prosecute powerful, connected, wealthy, or at least with access to wealth, white men. But my beef has more to do, again, with the self-induced, self-inflicted, unforced errors occurring just about everywhere. All right, so we'll turn the page here. We got a couple of the stories to talk about in the second half of this show. Marjorie Taylor Greene failed to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson, who, by the way, had help from Democrats to preserve himself, but was also out there taking barbs at Democrats at various times yesterday and over the course of the week. So we'll dive into that. And also Mike Collins, Congressman Mike Collins, is sort of waffling a little bit, backtracking in some respects to sharing a tweet that showed the Ole Miss video where you had the frat boy making the monkey ape noises at a black protester. But he hasn't taken the social media retweet down. Lots to discuss on those two fronts when the Ron Show returns. On the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. You can also listen on demand at ProgressiveVoices.com all day. And of course, if you're listening via podcast, then you know we're available via podcast.
Archived audio, blogs, social media links, and more, all in one place. Log on at RonShowATL.com. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
So we've had protests, we've had counter-protests on dozens, if not hundreds, of college campuses across the United States. Those who are in support of peace efforts, pushing for ceasefires, pro-Palestinian protests, and again, counter-protests on campuses throughout the United States. We've had that happen here in the state of Georgia, on Atlanta University Center campuses, AUC campuses, also at Emory University, University of Georgia, Ole Miss University, home of the Rebels. Remember, they used to have the old Southern, the old white guy moniker, the clearly antebellum caricature. Athletic department's mascot. I mean, they've shelved that. They've backed off that a little bit to some extent. But it's still Ole Miss University, home of the Rebels. And so there was a black pro-Palestinian protester who was being shouted down by dozens of white counter-protesters. I'm saying white. I don't think I saw any protesters of color shouting back at her. I'll give you the audio in case you missed it. I don't see any. Maybe I'm missing them, but then you got this. Yeah. So it starts with the one dude doing the ape noises, and then it sounds like a little bit of mimicking from the audience joining in with that. And to be fair, maybe some of it is just barking, hooting. Okay. Georgia Congressman Mike Collins actually retweeted that video. That's right, a sitting congressman, Mike Collins, retweeted that video. Tia Mitchell at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporting that Representative Mike Collins acknowledged Monday criticism he faced for reposting that viral video showed apparently racist behavior during a campus protest. He acknowledged that the retweet showed racist behavior. Collins had faced backlash, including a rebuke from the Georgia NAACP after sharing the video of counter-protesters at the University of Mississippi shouting at a pro-Palestinian protester, a black woman. One student in the video appeared to be making monkey sounds and gestures towards the woman. Ole Miss is taking care of business, is what Collins said. Referring to black people as animals, particularly monkeys, is a well-known racist trope, Tia Mitchell writes. Which part of this is appropriate for a Georgia congressman from Georgia to retweet? The Georgia NAACP posted in response. The gestures were seen in a video that Collins amplified of a confrontation involving Ole Miss students chanting, "Lock her up," at the pro-Palestinian demonstrator. The video has garnered more than 20 million, it's well over 50 million now, views. Collins defended his post over the weekend and swiped at former Republican National Committee Chair Michael Steele, also an African-American, by the way, after he accused the Georgia Republican of casual approval of racist behavior. Collins snapped back that all Steele does is, quote, repeat leftist talking points. However, on Monday, Collins issued a statement saying he does not condone racism or discrimination and that any student found to have targeted another person for the color of their skin should face the consequences. But he hasn't taken the retweet down. In fact, he's stuck with it. He's done this before. He has retweeted some questionable things and stuck with it. Here's his statement. I've been pointing out on multiple occasions several examples, specifically outside of the Ivy Leagues and coastal elite institutions, dog whistle, the SEC, for example, where regular students are standing up against the pro-Hamas, which to me is kind of racist, anti-American, Antifa anarchists. Is Antifa in the room with us? I believe any school like Ole Miss or UGA that does not allow the occupiers to run roughshod over the 99% of students who are there to learn and enjoy college are taking care of business. Here's the thing. The video he shared doesn't show Ole Miss, quote, taking care of business. It shows a barrage of frat boys hooting, hollering, and making monkey gestures at one black pro-Palestinian protester. His statement continues, the vast majority of students do not want the American flag disrespected. She's not doing that. In fact, in the video, you'll see one of the white frat boys wearing an American flag pair of overalls. They do not want to see their fellow classmates being harassed for being Jewish. Being black, apparently different. They do not want statues of founding fathers defaced. They do not want their campus to be trashed and destroyed. Again, none of this in the video. Let me be very clear. I believe in the First Amendment right to free speech, peaceful assembly, and expression. I do not, however, tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, or otherwise. And yet he amplifies that video and has yet to take it down. It's the opposite of what my faith teaches, he says, and it's not personally how I treat people, except on social media. I understand and respect the feedback that's been shared regarding a single individual during the Ole Miss protest. If that person is found to have treated another human being improperly because of their race, they should be punished appropriately and will hopefully seek forgiveness. Frankly, I do not believe that to be the focal point of the video shared at the time, but I recognize that there certainly seems to be some potentially inappropriate behavior that none of us should seek to glorify. That none of us, he says, should seek to glorify. And yet when you go to his Twitter X feed, it's still retweeted as of right now. But the dude wasn't done. Another Tia Mitchell article points this out. A post on the Twitter X platform by Georgia Congressman Mike Collins, where he appeared to compare recent news about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who had a dead worm in his brain, to his father's and uncle's untimely deaths, drew swift and widespread criticism Wednesday. Can we get this guy off of social media? If I were working for him, I would be telling him, sir, maybe stay off the social media. It was the second time in less than a week that a post on Collins' feed on a social media site prompted a backlash, but it joins a growing list of problematic and controversial posts by the Jackson Republican who is in his first term in the U.S. House. The latest trouble for Collins came as he responded to reports by the New York Times about Kennedy's testimony in a 2012 deposition about memory loss that he was experiencing at the time. Kennedy said that a doctor told him scans showed the issue was, quote, caused by a worm that got into my brain and ate a portion of it and then died. Kennedy, of course, running for president as an independent, he is largely considered to be drawing support away from former President Donald Trump. His campaign is built in part on Kennedy presenting himself as a younger and fresher voice in politics compared with Trump and President Joe Biden. By the way, he's not that much younger. Collins, who is a Trump surrogate and known for sarcastic and biting social media posts, laid into Kennedy with a crass reference. You either die a Kennedy with a hole in the brain or live long enough to become a Kennedy with a hole in the brain. I'm stunned. President John F. Kennedy, Tia Mitchell reminds us, assassinated in 1963 after a gunman shot him in his head and back while he rode in a motorcade in Dallas. Robert F. Kennedy Sr., killed in Los Angeles 5 years later while campaigning for president. He was shot several times, including in the back of his head. The bullet left fragments in his brain. A spokesperson for Collins said, the post is a reference to a famous line from the movie Batman the Dark Knight. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. The spokesman did not explain why Collins replaced the words in the quote with what appeared to be direct references to the deaths of the elder Kennedys. Mike Collins, Congressman, Republican. from right here in Georgia. Also from right here in Georgia, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
The form of the resolution is as follows. Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant. This is the uniparty for the American people watching.
The gentlelady will suspend. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no.
So I think that's pretty easy to deduce. Marjorie Taylor Greene does not speak for the majority of Americans. Mike Johnson came out afterwards to speak to the vote.
Well, hello, everyone. It's just another Wednesday on Capitol Hill. I want to say that I appreciate the show of confidence from my colleagues to defeat this misguided effort. That is certainly what it was. As I've said from the beginning, and I've made clear here every day, I intend to do my job. I intend to do what I believe to be the right thing, which is what I was elected to do, and I'll let the chips fall where they may. In my view, that is leadership. Members have just voted. They made their voices heard on the motion to vacate matter, and now we have very important work to do for the country. There are a lot of things to fix. Last week, we announced a house-wide effort to crack down on anti-Semitism on campus. This morning, we introduced legislation to fortify American elections and ensure that only American citizens can vote. I'm glad that this distraction is not going to inhibit that important work and all of the other things that are on the table and on the agenda for us right now. Hopefully, this is the end of the personality politics and the frivolous character assassination that has defined the 118th Congress. It's regrettable. It's not who we are as Americans, and we're better than this. We need to get beyond it.
Are we?
The Speaker of the House serves the whole House. That's the job, everybody. But I am a lifelong movement conservative Republican, and I intend to continue to govern in accordance with those core principles. We believe in the core principles. I call them the 7 core principles of American conservatism, but they're also the core principles of America itself. I believe in individual freedom, limited government, the rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. Those are the guiding principles that inform our work and that we work for every day here to pursue, to ensure that all Americans have more liberty and opportunity and security. And those foundations are in jeopardy right now. We need steady hands at the wheel. We need people who understand what made America the strongest, the most powerful, the most free, the most successful, the most benevolent nation in the history of the world. We have to fight for that every day because we're in a battle between 2 competing visions for what America is and what it's going to be. And that's what I'm about every day here, and I'll continue that. We have important work, not only to keep the House majority, but to grow the majority, because that will be necessary to help save this country. And the work that we have to elect a Republican president. We're on that as well.
And yet, just seconds ago, he was talking about steady hands at the wheel and the rule of law. Have you looked at who your nominee is, buddy?
In this moment, the country desperately needs a functioning Congress. And that's what the overwhelming majority of the members in this body demonstrated today. I'm proud to serve in this position. It's not one that I aspired to. It's not one that I ever expected to have or planned for. But it is the honor of my life and career to do this, and I will do it so long as this body will have me do that. We have a great vision for the country. We're not deterred. We have many problems to fix. And I'm going to tell you what you all have heard me say many times. I believe in the goodness of America. I believe in the future of this country. I believe, as Reagan said, as he reminded us what Lincoln originally said, we are the last best hope of man on earth. And by God's grace, we'll save this country. And I'll keep fighting every day to make sure that happens. Thank you for being here.
Message to Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Incidentally, one of the core principles that America has flourished on, democracy, is something you did not hear Speaker of the House, Republican Mike Johnson, speak of. You know why? Republicans don't like democracy. In fact, they're looking to erase it wherever they can, including in Washington State, where the state Republican Party decided to eliminate the word democracy at any chance they're given. Rachel Maddow broke this down. I'm going to dive into this. In fact, let's just do this here.
They decided that as the Washington State Republican Party, they would this year take a stand against democracy. And I do not mean this as a metaphor. I am not performing political analysis. I am literally describing what they literally did.
We do not want to be a democracy. Originally, congressmen were elected by a direct democracy, senators were elected by their state legislatures, and presidents are elected by the Electoral College. We are devolving into a democracy because now congressmen and senators are elected by the same pool, a direct democracy. And with the national popular vote coming, we're going to be electing our president by a direct democracy too. Bad idea.
Devolving?
Bad idea. We are devolving into a democracy. We do not want to be a democracy. Okay. As Danny Westneat at the Seattle Times reported, delegates of the Washington State Republican Convention then stood up one by one to argue that the U.S. should repeal the 17th Amendment, which allows us to vote for our United States senators. After that resolution passed, they went bigger. They voted to put this language into their platform. Quote, we encourage Republicans to substitute the words republic and republicanism, where previously they have used the word democracy. Every time the word democracy is used favorably, it serves to promote the principles of the Democratic Party, the principles of which we ardently oppose. Quote, we oppose legislation which makes our nation more democratic in nature.
Eeks.
We oppose legislation which makes our nation more democratic in nature. So say Washington State Republicans, officially in writing in their party platform. What's going on here?
I have an idea. I actually think Republicans are falling victim to what is called the new propaganda war. And Anne Applebaum wrote in The Atlantic all about this. Not necessarily tying Republicans to Russia and China, and they're attacking democracy in the United States, although it seems to be working, but globally as well. That's right. We have been trying to spread democracy across the globe, yet we don't do it very well here. And yet Russia and China are succeeding in not only stemming those efforts, but turning them back. We'll dive into that tomorrow on The Ron Show. Looking forward to that. So we're in the home stretch of The Ron Show. Follow us on your preferred social media platforms at Ron Show ATL, Facebook, Twitter, X, Threads, Instagram. I keep mentioning Threads, and I do nothing on Threads. Is there a way I can tie it to one of the others and it just auto feeds? Can I not do that? I can do. Oh, they're not all owned by the same people, so I can do that on Facebook and Instagram. But when do I ever post anything to Instagram that winds up on Facebook and vice versa? Okay, I'm doing this inner monologue, but you're listening in. Sorry, my apologies. By the way, I've also had this open tab that I've been meaning to dive into here, and while I've got a few extra minutes, Maureen Downey writing an op-ed in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. When was this? May 4th. Yeah, I've been sitting on this a minute. That speaks to campus protests. The opinion headline, colleges want students to change the world, not take over the quad. I haven't even dived into this yet, but I'll give you a piece of it as I read along. When high school students tour elite colleges, admissions directors stress that their campuses want applicants who follow their passion and live their principles. For example, Emory University's website advises would-be applicants that it seek out students eager to join us to make the world, in ways big and small, a better place, who have a voice and who have demonstrated an engagement with the world around them. Downey writes, while some colleges may value students willing to disrupt the status quo, they aren't as keen on them disrupting exams on commencement. We're seeing that play out in the protests erupting on campuses across the country over the Israel-Gaza war, some of which have become violent, triggering armed police responses and extensive media coverage. A national poll by the Institute of Politics at Harvard Kennedy School, released in April, found 18 to 29-year-olds support a permanent ceasefire in Gaza by a 5-to-1 margin. Emory became a national focal point when its president called in law enforcement to quell a pro-Palestinian protest on April 25th that he contended was largely outsiders. We all know now that he was wrong about that. He has admitted as much. When videos captured Emory staff and students being wrestled to the ground by Atlanta police and the Georgia State Patrol, President Gregory Fenves retracted his initial statement, saying, quote, "It is clear to us now that this information was not fully accurate, and I apologize for that mischaracterization. Let me be clear, I am devastated that members of our community were caught up in law enforcement activity, enforcing the removal of the encampment," he added. On Friday, the Faculty Senate of the Emory College of Arts and Sciences approved a vote of no confidence in Fenves. The vote tally was 358 to 119. At last count, 7,200 people signed a Change.org petition calling on Fenves to resign and blaming him for the, quote, targeting, tear gassing, rubber bullet shootings, and wrongful arrests of individuals who were peacefully exercising their right to protest. Instead of upholding the values of compassion and justice, you actively participated in the suppression of dissent and the perpetuation of violence against marginalized communities. An alumnus who signed the petition explained, I am concerned by how quickly the administration chose to use violence against peaceful protesters. It's time for Emory to follow its motto of where courageous inquiry leads and listen to its own students. These are our children. This is our community. If we aspire to be a free society, part of our process is allowing people to be heard, said Andrea Young, executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia. At a university, you should be setting an example of how and creating a process and approach where we can have passionate disagreement about something. In a letter to college presidents last week, Young reminded them of their commitment to open dialogue and urged restraint in bringing armed police to campus protests, except as a necessary last resort, saying, we haven't even talked about that some of these kids borrowed tens of thousands of dollars to go to these schools that are now thinking about expelling them. I think it's a kind of a creeping authoritarian approach to young people. Maureen Downey continues, America appears torn about the capacity and accountability of young people. On one hand, politicians insist that even teens as old as 17 and 18 need school boards to protect them from books, yet those same politicians want to throw the book at college students participating in campus protests over Gaza. Downey's op-ed continues. Governor Brian Kemp told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that protesters should face expulsion and suspension, saying, people need to pay the piper. If you've broken the law, if you're damaging property, if you're assaulting, especially police officers, you should have harsh penalties. Send a message. We're not going to allow Georgia to become the next Columbia University. I've gotten my Governor Brian Kemp down bad. Kemp ought to consider that Columbia may not want to become the next Georgia, Downey writes. Zing. The state has a dubious record in its treatment of student protesters during the civil rights movement. One even Kemp couldn't defend. In 1963, black students attempted to integrate the Broad Street lunch counters in Rome, Georgia, by sitting and opening books, leading employees to pour soapy water on them to force them to leave, adding ammonia to the water as an irritant, according to first-hand accounts by the students. The Rome students endured threats from white patrons, including young men loudly saying, if we kill about 2 or 3 of them, they'll stop. Boy, the whole Ole Miss video comes right back to my head right here with the young white men yelling, right? Back to Downey. As the police came and arrested the students, another group would show up to take their place. By the day's end, police arrested and jailed 62 students, most of whom were convicted of crimes for their protest. Students are proven catalysts of change and innovation, though often riling adults with their impatience and their untamed energy. Footnote, by the way, have we not noticed that now President Biden has stopped the shipment of bombs to Israel, and now Netanyahu is a little miffed by that. Well, we can go it alone. Fine, send the money back. Send the goods we have sent to you back. Oh, you're not going to do that. Anyway, the protesters are having an effect. Back to Maureen Downey here. When Atlanta University Center students formed the Atlanta Student Movement in 1960 to dismantle segregation, they ran into resistance from the worried presidents of the colleges. They felt we didn't come here to save the world. We came here to get an education, recalled the late Lonnie King, who as a Morehouse student in the late 1950s co-founded the Atlanta Student Movement and often spoke about his experience as a young protester before his death in 2019. Downey concludes, as with today's campus protesters, the students didn't listen to their elders. They marched, boycotted, and changed history. Good piece. Going to share that in today's show notes at ronshowatl.com. As I mentioned earlier, going to dive in tomorrow to an Anne Applebaum piece written in The Atlantic that speaks to Russia and China coming together. And in accordance, at least common chord, with MAGA Republicans in stemming the tide of democracy globally and here in the United States as well. That's tomorrow, 9 to 10 a.m. on the America One Radio app, AmericaOneRadio.com. Show notes at RonShowATL.com. Have a great one.